All right, today we're breaking down a really fascinating analysis of how Brazil's entire legal system was put through the ultimate stress test by the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, the legal scholar Javier Garcia Francisco Roca really hit the nail on the head. He said, the pandemic is a test of the solidity of our constitutional system. And that's exactly what this was. It wasn't just a health crisis. It was a deep constitutional crisis that stretched Brazil's legal framework to its absolute breaking point. So, this brings us to the big question, the one that's really at the heart of this entire explainer. How did Brazil's system actually do on this test? Okay, let's dive in. First up, let's look at the system itself. The core of the problem, and this is so important to understand, is that Brazil walked into this unprecedented global crisis with completely the wrong tools for the job. Think about it like this. You've got a toolbox. For a delicate, complex public health emergency, you need a precision instrument, right? A scalpel. But when Brazil opened its constitutional toolbox, all it found were sledgehammers. And this is where that problem becomes crystal clear. Brazil's existing emergency powers, the state of defense and state of siege, they were designed for political stuff like war or major instability. But what the country needed was a response triggered by science, something that let them roll out fast, evidence-based health measures. They were basically trying to fight a virus with tools designed to stop a military coup, just a total mismatch. So what happens when you don't have the right tools? Well, you're forced to improvise, and that's what we're going to cover next. The government's response just became this chaotic cascade of improvised and often totally conflicting rules. So how did this whole improvisation thing actually play out? Well, a flood of rules just started pouring out. First, a simple administrative ordinance declared a national public health emergency. Then, right after that, a federal law was kind of hastily thrown together to create a temporary framework, to authorize things like isolation and quarantine. And to top it all off, a legislative decree declared a state of public calamity. But get this, it was mostly for fiscal reasons. It was about freeing up the budget, not really about managing the health response itself. You're seeing a patchwork, not a plan. The result of all this was what the source calls an upside-down state of exception. Think about what that means. People felt all the effects of an emergency, right? Their fundamental rights were limited, their lives turned upside down, but it was all happening without the formal constitutional checks and balances that are supposed to be there in a situation that drastic. It was all the power of an emergency with none of the protection. So you might be wondering, was this chaos unique to Brazil? Well, to figure that out, we're going to look at how other countries handled this, and there are some really valuable lessons here. When you look at different approaches, a pattern starts to emerge. Germany, for example, used a very specific, pre-existing administrative law. And the lesson there? Having a detailed plan ready to go gives you clarity and speed. Spain went a different route, using its constitutionally defined state of alarm. It worked, but it was still heavily debated and tested in the courts. The big takeaway from all this is that having a clear, predefined plan, no matter what kind it is what separates an orderly response from a chaotic one. Okay, so all these lessons lead us to the logical next step, building a brand new legal toolkit. The analysis proposes a very specific solution, tailored for Brazil, to make sure these mistakes don't happen again. And here it is. The proposed solution is called the Administrative Act of Sanitary Exception. This is the core idea. It's a new legal instrument written right into the Constitution that would finally give the state that scalpel we talked about earlier. It allows for quick, decisive action, but, and this is the most important part, it comes with clear limits, it has to be based on science, and it guarantees that the rule of law is upheld. So how would this actually work? Well, it boils down to 4 key features. First, it has to be in the Constitution to have real legitimacy. Second, to avoid political games, every single measure has to be scientifically grounded. Third, to protect people's rights, any action taken must be proportional to the risk and have a clear time limit. And finally, to stop the chaos we saw before, it has to define exactly who is in charge. And that brings us to our final section, preparing for the next crisis. Because the whole point of this analysis is to build a much more resilient system for the future. The next crisis, after all, is a question of when, not if. So what does this blueprint for the future actually look like? Well, it means creating a permanent, technically independent national crisis authority. It means making sure every decision is guided by science, not politics. It means having clear rules for how federal, state, and local governments work together, And maybe most importantly, it means defining the limits on our fundamental rights before a crisis hits, so we're not just making it up as we go. That's the path forward. And it's so important to remember this isn't just some dry, academic, legal debate. This is about something real, making sure that the next time a crisis comes, the response protects both our lives and our liberty effectively. The big thing to take away here is that having the right legal framework in place before everything goes sideways is what separates an orderly response from a chaotic one. And that leaves us with this final, really challenging question. The last pandemic taught the world, and especially Brazil, an incredibly tough lesson. The only question now is, are we ready to actually learn from it? It's a challenge to turn those painful experiences into concrete actions that will keep us all safer next time.